This is From Courtroom to Carline, the podcast where we discuss life as a lawyer and a parent.
I'm Rick.
And I'm Jenna.
Your host and partners both in the courtroom and in parenting.
Join us as we navigate the fascinating worlds of life as a parent and a lawyer. Get ready for a roller coaster ride where law meets love and where the gavel meets the car line.
Welcome to another episode of From Courtroom to Carline, a legal parenting podcast. Today on the show, we've got Bill Soronen. He is a private investigator with Burden of Proof Investigations. He's been a private investigator for, 20 plus years now here in the area?
Yep, 20 years.
Well, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Bill.
No problem. You got it. Good to see everyone.
So one of the things that I want to ask you about is, you've obviously been through a lot of situations in your line of work, being a private investigator. What sort of made you choose that career path, and why do you think it's so fulfilling for you?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I was prior military. I was in the Air Force for 6 years. I deployed in 2002. When I came home, I'm originally from upstate New York. So when I came home from deployment, luckily the Air Force only does 6 month deployments. The Army does a year. So that I only had to do half the time. So I moved to Florida in 2003, March or April of 2003. And, a natural transition for military is to go into law enforcement. So that's what I pursued when I got out of the military. I applied with the St. Petersburg Police Department. So I had family down here, which is what brought me down here originally. I've got family up in Clearwater, an uncle and an aunt. And I applied for the St. Petersburg Police Department. I applied for some other local law enforcement positions, got some feedback from them, was in the process of going through the steps to become a police officer. And in the interim, I got a job as a banquet bartender at the Bellevue Biltmore up in Clearwater. You guys may remember it. It was, it's gone, unfortunately, but I was doing doing wedding singer stuff, like banquet bartending. And one of my fellow bartenders there was an assistant public defender in Manatee County. Her name is Carline Glenn. She's a still very dear friend of mine and a private attorney in Manatee County. And we were literally on a 15-minute break, and she says, "What? Don't be a cop. The public defender's office has investigators and we're hiring, so you should apply." So I applied for an investigator position with the Manatee County Public Defender's Office. They didn't feel I was qualified enough because I didn't have investigative experience, but they offered me a felony legal assistant position. And the woman who interviewed me's name was Cindy Smith, and the chief of that office's name was Jim Slater, a bit of a legend down in Manatee County, passed away many years ago. The factal in Manatee County now gives an award each year, the Jim Slater Award. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a big deal in the criminal defense community. He was a great guy. I was very privileged to have an opportunity to work with him, and I am so grateful that they offered me that felony legal assistant position because I was green. I didn't know anything about. I went to school for criminal justice, and I had investigative experience, quasi experience from my time in the military, but it was like scene investigation. That was my part of my job in the Air Force. And that I worked there for a year and a half as a felony legal assistant, and I learned about setting depositions, setting client appointments, how to interact with clients, their families, learning about jail mail. Back in the day, 20 years ago, and now it's all electronic. It used to be physical jail mail, and about bond hearings and status conferences, and it just taught me the basics. And I still use those skills today. I stayed at the public defender's office until early 2006, and I was offered a client interviewer position at the Manatee County Jail with them, and I was ready to go. I wanted to move. I wanted to be a field investigator. So I was lucky enough to interview and get a job with a private investigative company that sponsored me to get my license. So I've been a licensed private investigator since 2006. There were some pros and cons to that. The pros were I was in the private sector. I didn't have a bunch of bosses anymore. The cons were I was winging it. I didn't have that. I know, Jenna, you worked at the public defender's office. There's such a wealth of experience there. There's so many decades of resources that you can tap into when you have a question as a young attorney or a legal assistant or just support staff. So from that, I created some of my own ways to do things. And that was good. It was a learning experience. And I'm forever grateful for that too. The one thing I've learned as a private investigator, solely as a criminal defense investigator, which I take great pride in, is you learn. Every day you learn. And once you stop having an open mind, do something different, because this is a forever changing career field that we're in. And I love what I do. And once I started doing it, there was no going back. I have the utmost respect for law enforcement always. But for me, this was the trajectory I wanted to go on. It was the path. And I've had 20 years later, we work together. You guys know we've chewed some of the same dirt, so to speak, So, yeah, that's how I got into it.
Was there anything about working for, the private sector, specifically criminal defense, that you had a problem with? Were you debating whether or not, you said you applied to become a police officer? Was there any part of you that was kind of struggling with, working for criminal defense?
No, I did. I was lucky enough to not know enough about either side of it. I was 25 years old. I'm 46 years old now. I've been doing this since I was 25 and in the private sector since I was 27. So I didn't have a gauge on either side. To my perception of law enforcement was, I think, what most young people's were. If they ask you for your ID, do it. If a cop says, I need to talk to you, you talk to him. Well, now not so much. With all due respect, there's stages to this. There's protection. And as an investigator, I always understood my role. So my role is not to be a lawyer. My role is to support the lawyer. I'm behind the scenes. Fundamentally, what you guys have to do and what all attorneys have to do in a courtroom, I don't want to do it. I had zero desire to ever go to law school. I had zero desire to be in a trial. And you guys have an immense amount of pressure. For me, I like to be clandestine and just do my thing. And, 90% of this is diligence. It's that 10% that makes it really, really fun, though. When you do overturn that stone and it's like, okay, we got something here.
I know in my experience at the public defender's office, I loved going on those adventures with the investigator.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
I was
absolutely.
like, get me out of the office. I'm tired of being in court. Sure. I'm tired of, being on the phone, talking about a case. Like, get me out there, get me in the sun, absolutely. Get me to meet people. Yeah. And like you said, you're learning every day. And that's because you're out there talking to people, absolutely. Figuring out life stories and, building a defense. Yeah. And so I love that aspect of it. And, that's definitely something that, I want to do more of. Yeah. But at the same time, I know who's better at it. People like you. Right. I remember when I first talked to you years back, I said, hey, could you help me with this case? You already knew who he was. You already knew the family. You already knew, the people involved without me even having to tell you anything about the case. You knew what was going on, and that's because you had such experience over the number of years there in Manatee County that, I can't do that. I can't knock on someone's door and have them trust me, but you can. Yeah. And I think that's just such a value.
I appreciate that. So that was by design. I saw... And that matriculates a little into Pinellas County. I've just recently, in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, really started working more in Pinellas. But I'm still, my roots and my connections are in Manatee County. I made that decision by design. I saw very clearly, very early into this experience, this game, so to speak, that trust, it just works in everything. If you don't drink the water of the people that you're trying to get, this is scary to get witnesses to come to court. This is scary to get people to talk to people. And let's just be honest, like I look like the warrant man. So that's not helping. You know what I mean? Like I'm a bald white guy knocking on people. I've been bald for 20 years, knocking on people's doors. When you look out the window, it's like, man, I'm not talking to that guy, So that took years, and it's something that, benefits me every day, still to this day. And that was absolutely by design. I looked at Manatee County. I looked at this area, Pinellas, Manatee, Sarasota, and I saw this is where I want to set my roots. And this is where I'm going to fight the good fight, so to speak. So yeah, that was by design, man. And I remember that phone call. I was on a golf course when you called me, as a matter of fact, about that case. And yeah, I'm glad we spoke, because here we are a few years later. Yeah, good stuff.
I think one of the most important things that we find in a private investigator is that our job is to tell our client's story. And sometimes it's hard to do that with just listening to them. But then when you have a private investigator like yourself, you're able to give us ideas of where we should be looking that we normally wouldn't, because we're not trained in that. So it gives us that opportunity to tell the client's story from the other people involved that, again, we normally wouldn't know to contact.
So I've been extremely lucky, and this includes both of you, to work with great lawyers. And what you get with working with great lawyers, and that's not an age or experience thing, that's an intuition for this type of work. I don't care if it's a 27-year-old attorney 2 years out of law school, or a 60-year-old trial tested 35 plus years. I learn from every attorney I work with. And I'm able to, and with that, as you both know, the criminal defense world is wide. And there are quite a few different kinds of cases. And you take a little bit and you put it in your tool bag and you find out I've worked, as I'm sure both of you have, hundreds of different types of cases, dozens of homicides, dozens of DUI manslaughters, home invasion robberies, misdemeanor DUIs, trespassing. You learn what works and what doesn't work. It's strictly a troubleshooting, but like all attorneys that I've had the privilege of working for, I've been very lucky in my career to work with folks like you and other attorneys that I'm still currently working with and have worked with in the past, because I take a little bit. I'm an open book. And if that can help a client in a different case, it's hugely important, and those are those little bits of experience that you just get over time. I think it's the same in any career field. Take pride in what you do, treat people with respect, and be diligent. Diligence is the key. It may not be important. It may not seem important. And then that's where some investigators and some maybe law enforcement personnel kind of get in their own way, is because they think that it may not be important. I learned a long time. Of course, I have discretion in what I think may be relevant or not, but you get all the information. You guys need to make that decision. I didn't go to law school. You guys did, right? And I just feel like I can interpret what I think the law is, but at the end of the day, I'm not an expert of law. Attorneys are doctors of law. You're experts of law, right? And if I can gather that information and say maybe 96% of it is not of any relevance, but 3 or 4% of it is, and to go back to the client, the information that I have gathered in cases in my career, that this is boots on the ground facts for me, that I believe have been most important, has been mitigation. The story. Again, I say this with all due respect to state attorneys, and if they're watching this and listening, listen to the totality of the story. Don't have tunnel vision. There oftentimes is a full story to go with a set of circumstances. And I was not formally trained in this. I didn't go to college for it. My mitigation reports that I write are real. They're human. They're not manufactured. They're not with some sort of anecdotal conclusion. They are what they are. And I've developed a methodology over the years of how I prepare them that includes the client and their family. I request that they do a bit of writing, specifically when they're in jail. And I've got a whole, you guys know, I've got a whole sheet that I use to get background on a client. And if they're in jail, and if I come back to get that letter, because that's how the process works. If we have time, we can go through it. If not, if you don't want to, we don't have to. If they give me a paragraph, to me, I don't care if they're 16 or 60. That's unacceptable. If you can describe your entire life in a paragraph, you are doing yourself a disservice. And you got to get it out of them because you guys need that.
And
bingo, bango.
And
right?
I think so much of what you do is telling that story. And, I used to think, growing up, private investigator, he's the guy wearing the trench coat.
I'm too fat. I don't fit into trench coats, man.
Ducking behind a pillar, taking pictures
Right.
of somebody and then later
Right.
showing them to.
Yeah.
So, that's not what an investigator does. There might be situations or cases that could possibly call for that. But, your job, like you said, is to get all the facts and tell the story. And, not every case goes to trial. Most cases don't go to trial. So that's why, you need to tell that story because that's what's going to sway the prosecution and kind of, showing leniency or getting, a good outcome for your client. So, you're an expert at that. Have there been any interesting cases over your, 20 years of experience that you feel comfortable sharing about that you think our listeners might appreciate?
Well said. Comfortable. Yeah. All right. So this is very basic stuff. So I don't want to glorify like what I do, but here's one story of that 10%, right? So there's the 90% is just due diligence, right? That may result in we addressed it and there wasn't anything there. This is going to fall into that 10%. So 2008, I had a case in Manatee County. There was a young man. So this goes all the way back to, what was it before Facebook? MySpace. Yeah, this was a MySpace deal. Yeah. So there was a young man, in Bradenton who had a recording studio. He was like a sound engineer, right? And he was robbed, to put it long story short, he was robbed. And it was a very serious case. They came in with guns. They duct taped him. It was a home invasion. It was very, 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 very serious, very scary stuff for this young man. And, I don't discount what he went through for a second. Law enforcement was called. They come out and he had hats that were stolen. And he went on MySpace and identified the people who robbed him, these 4 folks, by MySpace photos and their profiles. He said, this is the person who robbed me. That person robbed me. So these 4 young men get arrested, teenagers, late teenage, 17 through 19 years old, get arrested. And the client I get, I can say his first name. His first name is Christopher. Lived in Sarasota, and his uncle was a sergeant on the Manatee County Sheriff's Office and saw the photos that this victim had provided to this detective from MySpace and goes, well, as they were trying to identify who they were, and goes, that's my nephew. Looked at the photo and says, that's my nephew, whom we later found out he hadn't seen since he was 8 years old, right? So Sergeant, uncle, calls my client Chris's dad, his brother, and says, hey, can you bring Chris up to Manatee County? We need to talk to him. And, he says, sure, brings him up there. They interview this young man, Chris. He's a senior in high school. He's a quarterback at one of the high schools in Sarasota, regular kid, just living his life, got a girlfriend, doing his thing, getting ready to go to college, graduate, all that fun stuff that we do, right? Yeah. And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't come up to Bradenton. I wasn't at a recording studio. And they showed him the photo and said, "That's you." He says, "That's not me." And they said, "That is you." And this guy identified you as the person who did this based on this photo. And I will admit, getting on the case later, the photo looked a lot like him. And that's all it took. And he was arrested for home invasion robbery, and they filed a criminal information on him. He spent 8 months in the county jail. I got involved in the case about 4 months later. And I went and I met with this young man at the jail. And you just know, I guess you just know. And I've been wrong in the past. Of course, we're all human. But this kid was telling the truth. He's like, "Look, man, I didn't do this." And he was screaming as loud as to anyone who would listen. "I didn't do this. I know the kid looks like me, but it's not me." So I took that photo, that MySpace photo, and for the next 3 months, I went on a mission to identify who this kid actually was. And it was through what you talked about, those connections, those local connections. What I ended up doing, what eventually found, I got the identity of the person whom it actually was by showing it to all the trustees at the jail.
Wow.
And saying, "Listen, you guys have access to 1,700 inmates. Find out who this guy is." And a young man named PJ, who I'd helped out in the past, was a trustee doing an 1129, which means 11 months, 29 days in the county jail. And he goes, "I know who that is. His dad's over in so-and-so pod." Reached out to the attorney. Dad said, "I'm not going to," it looked, So to get confirmation, the dad confirmed that the kid had been arrested as a juvenile. We got a court order to get his juvenile booking photo, compared them. Case was dismissed.
Wow.
But he spent 8 months in the county jail, spent his senior year in the county jail. So that's how things happen. You got that's where that 10%, it was just diligence. I was showing to that picture to everyone and their sister. You know what I mean? I said, "Do you know this kid? Do you know?" And I'll tell you, when we got the two photos together, when we were able to get the kid's juvenile booking photo, whom it actually was, they looked like almost like twins. But it wasn't him. And it all started from a sergeant looking over a detective's shoulder and going, "That's my nephew," whom he hadn't seen in 9 years.
You say obviously that's the 10% of the cases. Obviously they're
Yeah.
not all like that.
Sure.
It doesn't always end up that way.
Sure.
But I can't help but think what would have happened had you not been on that case. Had
Yeah.
somebody not been looking into that, had somebody
Yeah.
not been on
Yeah.
Chris's side doing that. And I think that's another point of why
Yeah.
investigators are so important
Yeah.
to cases, so that we can find out, is there something else to look at here?
Yeah, and quite honestly, that was the fork, and I'm sure both of you might have gone through this too. Of course, there's a monetary side of it. This is a business, but that was my fork in the road at the public defender's office. They're overwhelmed. They're good people doing, and the state attorney's office too. Government employees across the board. It's a overwhelmed system, and I was able to navigate more freely in the private sector. And you lawyers do it too. You lock into something and you become obsessed with it. It's hard to not. I mean, yeah, sure, we've all got families and lives, but I take it home with me still. To this day, I take it home with me. It's a blessing and a curse. It is what it is. But I became obsessed with that case because I just believed the kid. And I looked at the photos, when I finally did get the photo, and I'm like, that's not him. That is not our guy. The MySpace photo and the booking photo, you lined them up, and it's like, that's him. Our guy's booking photo, the booking photo of the juvenile. Our guy's booking photo, they were just a little bit of a difference, It's the stuff that keeps you up at night. I was just thinking of different ways. Who can I show this to? How can I get it? The trustee thing took about 2 months to, before the little light bulb went off, and I go, show it to the trustees. They'll see everyone will.
Yeah.
And that's what I did.
Is there anything about being a private investigator that, gets you nervous or scared, whether it's because you got to go into a particular neighborhood or deal with particular people, anything that still kind of rattles your nerves even after all the experience that you've got?
So this is probably the incorrect answer, but it's the truth. Not so much anymore. And I'll tell you, for the record, I've never carried a weapon, ever.
Wow. Never
carried a weapon, never been licensed to carry a weapon as far as working as a private investigator. I just feel like if I've always had a joke, maybe this isn't appropriate. Like if if I can't talk my way out of it, maybe they need to clunk me over the head with something. You know what I mean? Maybe, but like, it's just, I just feel like honesty and old school gumshoeing just go so much further than intimidation of, and plus, like I said earlier, I already look like a cop. It's like, I don't need to be carrying a gun and a fake PI badge. Like, I don't do that. I just knock on the door and just like, look, man, you want to talk? Most people are nice.
Well, thanks, Bill, for coming on, and we're going to have you on our next segment of What Happened to Florida Man. So, but before we do that, if an attorney wants to hire you, if somebody else wants to hire you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I don't solicit business, but my work cell is area code 727-643-7869, and my company is called Burden of Proof Investigations. So give me a call. If I can help you, I will.
Perfect. Thank you so
Thanks,
much,
guys.
Bill.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thanks for having
Bill.
me.
All right, so on this segment of What Happened to Florida Man, our headline is Florida Man stops paying for rental car, uses it to give Uber rides. So obviously, I guess trying to be an entrepreneur, good business model. Bill, this happened back in October of 2023. He was released on bail the next day. The charges were driving while license suspended and grand theft motor vehicle. His bond amount was $250 on the driving while license suspended and $1,000 on the grand theft motor vehicle. Before I ask you specifically about this case, just so the viewers know, obviously we do some research into these cases. We find out the person's name, where this happened, and we'll search the clerk system. More often than not, there will come a Florida Man story headline like this, and I can't find anything on the clerk's website. So a little bit of background for this case. I searched the Polk County records search, and I could not find any results for this gentleman's name. I was able to then look on the Polk County Jail's website, where I was able to find his booking photo and his bond amount, but there was nothing on the clerk's website. In your experience, what could be the issue of trying to find these cases through the clerk's website?
It was dismissed and sealed or expunged. I don't know. There's various reasons, but the Polk County, for example, Hillsborough County will put the clerk number right on their booking information. If you can't find it through the clerk website, in my experience, it's usually a spelling issue. And Elijah is can be spelled with very different variations. For me personally, what I would do is I would take his name, what information I had. There would be enough for me off of that booking information you found on the sheriff's office website, the jail website, with the date of birth and the variation of the name. I'd run him through a database, and even if it was a sealed or expunged record, a case number would pop up with his arrest, and I could go from there. So that's how I would start looking for it. I'd run them through a database, do the basic stuff. But if it was just public records, let's say you don't have access to the databases I have with my licensing, it's just you go old school with variations of names. You can do public records requests to the clerk's office around the time, because you've got the basics. You know when they were arrested, you know what the charge was. So put in a public records request for case numbers in that too, because the clerk's office is going to be a few days or a week behind. Put in a public records request for that type of charge within a 7-day time frame of arrest and get a list of all the names. It's all public record. They have to give it to you and do a comparison. Usually it's a spelling issue.
We see so many cases now where all the police have to go on is a phone number, and they're able to get so much information by running a phone number.
Yeah.
And it's, so if I were to give you a phone number, you mentioned that you've got access to certain databases with your licensing. Are you able to share what those databases are and what sort of information you can get just from a phone number?
You can get a wealth of information from a phone number. And to folks that don't have access to paying a private investigator or hiring a private investigator, get TruthFinder. It's public. You can use it. The information is about 75 to 80% accurate, and a phone number will give you names, addresses, registered vehicles, bills in their name, cities and states they've lived in, criminal records, traffic records. Certain states are more transparent with their public record laws than others. Florida is very transparent. We're very lucky in this state to have the public record laws that we abide by. So yeah, a skip trace on a phone number can get you access to social media too. There's so much you can get from a phone number. Here's the trick to that. Many phone numbers are recycled, as we know, and that's a conundrum that law enforcement deals with, that we deal with. But the algorithms that law enforcement is using through their databases are not much different than what I'm using. And TruthFinder, it's a collection of public record. So you can run a phone number, quote unquote, skip trace it, and get a ton of information.
That's good information, especially for attorneys that might be just starting
Yeah.
out and don't have
Yeah.
access to the funds yet for a private
I still want you to hire me, but my
Absolutely.
databases are better, but TruthFinder is good.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's very good. It's very accurate.
Thank you so much, Bill, for being on the episode today. We've loved hearing your stories.
Yeah, great. Thanks for having me. I
Thank you
appreciate
very
it.
much, Bill.
You got it. Thank you.
And that has been an episode of From Courtroom to Carline, a legal parenting podcast.